knowing the whole story. We have the completed Word in front of us, and all of us knows the Christmas story. But just imagine how that first Christmas was. To those who were there, to those who experienced it. This morning we'd like to share with you what may have been going through their minds.
I tell you, folks, it was the longest, scariest, most exciting, confusing, most wonderful day of my entire life. You know, when you realize you're going to be a father, well, there's not really anything in this whole entire world that I can compare that feeling to. And then when you realize that God has somehow saw you fit to be the stepfather for his one and only son, well, to be honest with you, that's a little bit overwhelming. I mean, he's a perfectly healthy, happy baby boy. Born just like any other baby. After seeing that, I understand why they call it labor. I mean, I've been working my whole life. Started when I was around 12 years old and been working since. And I have never, ever worked as hard as Mary did that night. I tell you, she's amazing. And when I say that she's amazing, I don't just mean through the birth and the labor, but, you know, for months people were talking behind our backs. And then we had this long trip down to Bethlehem. And through it all, no complaining. And I just sat back and watched that night as she took an ordinary animal's feeding trough, turned it into a little baby cradle. And she never complained. She never questioned God and had to ask why. It didn't matter that nothing made sense to us. She just knew that in the end, everything would work out. She had that kind of faith. Was happy to just be doing God's will. And I tell you, I understand now why God would pick her. I really do. But I still don't understand why he would pick me.
God had been silent for over 400 years. We knew because we'd been listening, in a sense. My job is to listen. Most people who talk a lot, you wouldn't typically call them wise, would you? No. I mean, we have a lot of other names for them, but wise typically isn't one of them. In my position, we look for signs everywhere. We watch the stars. We watch the stars and try to interpret what it is that they're telling us. I read of a star once that foretold the coming of a new king. And then suddenly one night, a star appears from out of nowhere. The star, it was different. Like a beacon in the night. After watching it for a while, I realized this must be the star that the Jews had been looking for. The one foretold in their ancient scriptures. The star of the Messiah. So I followed it. A few of us did. Yeah, we actually followed a star. It was so bizarre. I mean, it led us. It moved, and we would follow. It guided us right to Jerusalem. And that's where we met Herod. Now, he claimed that he wanted to worship the Messiah too. And he asked us, no, he demanded that once we found the newborn, that we were to come back and tell him. But we were warned in a dream not to trust that man. We journeyed with the star for over 2 years, guiding us right to Judea. And suddenly it stopped, shining down over this small cottage. Our journey ended not at a palace fit for a king, but at the home of a peasant. Yeah. Our journey ended not at a palace, but at this small cottage. Well, this was it. So we gathered our gifts and we gathered our thoughts and we did the best we could to control our emotions. And behind those doors, we found a new king. A king who commands the movement of the stars in the sky. And yet came to live with his people. God was through being silent. He spoke, and the Word became flesh to dwell amongst his people. When we knelt down that night in front of that baby boy, and we laid our gifts at his feet, we had to. 400 years of silence broken by the cries of the new king. Yeah. He spoke and we worship.
Well, you're no spring chicken. That's the first thing my neighbor said to me when I told her I was expecting. I mean, can you believe that? Maybe she didn't believe me. But I don't hold it against her. She's been a little bit cranky ever since she found that mouse in her girdle drawer. You know, maybe she just didn't realize what a miracle this was for me. I mean, Zachariah and I had been trying our whole lives to have a child of our own, and you know, by the time most of my hair turned gray and, well, his had just turned loose, we'd just given up hope. But nothing is impossible for God. He seems to delight in making life out of barren places. And that wasn't all. The angel who had brought us this unbelievable news had even more to say. Our child, our son, would be used by God to prepare the people for the coming of the Messiah. It was all too much of a gift to be real. And then I thought, well, how am I going to train up a child for a job like that? You know, God had those getting better. When I was about 6 months along, my cousin Mary came for a visit. And no sooner had she said hello than my unborn son flipped and jumped inside me. Right then, God opened my eyes so that I could clearly see that this young girl standing in my very own home was also expecting. And his name would be called Wonderful Counselor, Almighty God, Everlasting Father, and Prince of Peace. About 9 months later, we got the news from Bethlehem. And I looked over at Zechariah, holding our very own miracle baby. And I just had one of those God moments when you just realize, you just say, God had different plans. He had brought us life out of barren places. He hadn't forgotten about us.